Hi guys, so today I'll be doing a non-spoiler review of Good Omens by Sir Pratchett and Gaiman. So this is a standalone fantasy novel with a hint of horror and comedy. This book was originally released in 1990, and as you may know, this book has been adapted to a series by Amazon and BBC. At the beginning of this month, Neil Gaiman, through his Tumblr account, announced that the second season of the show is indeed coming. So in order to celebrate that announcement, I figure it's time to do a Good Omens review because this book has been sitting on my TBR for quite a while. Alright, so without giving too much away, this book basically follows a demon named Crawley and an angel named Aziraphale, and they were kind of fond of the Earth's lifestyle, so they were trying to stop this impending end of the world that was prophesied by a witch named Agnes Nutter, written in her book called The Nice and the Accurate Prophecies of Agnes Nutter, Witch. And the story itself is written in the third point of view, particularly the third omniscient point of view. The narrator is all-knowing and all-seeing to the character's consciousness, and all of the characters in this book is written in that way. There's quite a lot of characters, I think, for a standalone novel. However, even though there's quite a lot of characters in this book, I don't feel like the point of view is difficult to follow, because I think that the authors are able to provide a very distinct point of view from one character to the other and provide an entertaining exposition. I will get into the writing style of this book in a bit, but I would like to discuss on the implication of the many casts in this book first. So the story takes place between probably like not even 7 days, plus there's like I believe there's like one flashback scene at the beginning of the story, and sometimes because there's a lot of point of view, there's a lot of characters, it kind of feels like a lot of things happens in one day, so it could be kind of overwhelming to read. It's not a huge problem for me, but sometimes I do feel that way. So if you're interested in this book, perhaps that will be one element that you might want to take into account. So the writing style of this book is, I think, worth discussing because there's one element that's quite stand out in this book, which is the humor. I do think that the book is hilarious, and I don't think that the jokes in this book are merely restricted to the people who live in the UK. There's just something universally funny with this book. Like, the jokes included in this book are not merely wordplay or pun. It's jokes that are playing with your logic, with irony. Basically, the dry humor is amazing. The principle of the joke itself is funny. So even though my mini thesis is that even though this book is translated to at least my language, it would still be really funny. And I really appreciate the fact that the author provides footnotes for jokes that are quite heavily referenced. So for the people who might not live or might not really familiar with the UK reference, here there are footnotes that will inform the readers, and the best part is that the footnote contains jokes. So when can you expect more? It's basically reading a joke within a joke. That's amazing. But I think it's worth noting that footnote here might put some readers off because you might not want to read back and forth between the paragraph and the footnote, so you might want to consider that point as well if you want to read this book. The pacing of this book is definitely that is a bit slower at the beginning and will get quicker when the book reached the end. So the first portion of the book mainly presented the characterization and the relationship dynamic between the characters. But once that initial characterization and also contextualization, the pace will get a bit quicker. However, because as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of characters in this book, not every character is going to come out at the beginning. So sometimes I find that the pacing could get a bit inconsistent because there's going to be new characters in the middle of the book, and then that time is going to be spent to present the characterization and contextualization of the new character. So when there's new characters showed up, the pacing will get a bit slower again, but once that initial phase is out, the pacing is going to get quicker again. Oh yeah, the exposition is quite, I wouldn't say long, but the exposition is quite important because this book is a journey-based book. So if you want to determine whether or not you want to read, you should probably ask yourself, do you want to read about exposition or you want a story that has more of an action element? So I've mentioned that there's quite a lot of cast in this book. However, I think I'm just going to mention several because it might give too much away. So the main characters are obviously Crowley and Aziraphale, who are a demon and an angel respectively, although sometimes it's difficult to categorize them that way because for someone who's supposed to be this mega entity that's quite extreme on the morality scale, both Crowley and Aziraphale is so relatable, and Aziraphale is relatable for his, I think, anxious disposition, and Crowley is relatable for his suave and nonchalant attitude, but inside he just has this soft and good heart. So I think that the author's ability to write a demon and an angel without making them too extreme on the morality scale is commendable. So there are 4 children characters that are written in this book, and I think the writer's ability to write children characters is also commendable. How their respective personalities and how that respective personality interacts with one another is very interesting to read. So the authors didn't write children as someone who's dumb and needs adults to be around or just hates adult all the time. That's not only the thing that they have in their mind. They have their own little world. They're actually really interesting and intelligent, and their jokes are super funny. The authors really approach writing children as just a normal humans, but they just happen to be young. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about a bit about the relation of this book and the series that was adapted by Amazon with BBC. So in 2019, the first season of the show has been released. And I would say that there's quite differences between this book and the series adaptation. I won't get into that much detail because it might contain spoilers. If I go into too much detail, I could spoiler both this book and the show. But I would say that the general difference is that the series has much more of an action element, whether this book has much more of characters exposition. This is much more journey and character based. The ending of the show is also quite different. I do think that the ending of the show is much more complex than the ending of this book. One of the reasons why Neil Gaiman changed the ending is because he doesn't want the book fan to get cocky with how the series is going to turn out. So for those of you who had read the book and haven't watched the show, I really recommend you to check the show because the ending is quite different. Or for those of you who had watched the show and haven't read the book, I think the book is still worth reading because there's so much contextualization and there's so many brilliant jokes here that I don't think the show really explored that much compared to this book. And for those of you who haven't read the book and who haven't watched the series or the show, I would also recommend this book because the jokes. And I would also recommend this book for those of you who wants a standalone fantasy story that doesn't necessarily follow the traditional writing structure with a grand theme like morality and free will. All in all, I really enjoy reading this book. As you could probably tell from my recommendation section, this book is really engaging to read. I chuckle several times reading this book. The jokes are the best part of the book. in my opinion, and the characters are really lovable and easily root for. I think I would give this book a 4 out of 5 stars rating. 1 star down is just because I think that the pacing could get a little bit inconsistent. So that was today's review of Good Omens by Sir Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. I hope that this review will help you in determining whether this book is worth your time or not. Let me know in the comment section whether you would want to read this book, or if you have read this book, tell me what you think about the book. I would like to thank everyone who made it through the end. Thanks for watching, and I hope that your tea will always be warm for reading.